Where do you look for love? Where do you seek support? Where do you find community? At one time, the answer for all these questions might have been at church. Today, however, I think the answer is more likely to be online. But in these strange times, you can also find church online. So we've reached a cosmic coalescence, so to speak. Good morning and welcome to online worship at First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. My name is Annie Foerster, and I'm minister to this congregation. There's a joke that went the rounds of Unitarian churches a few years back that introduces one of the paradoxes of worship. It's not the same in every church. And the story goes like this. A visitor from another church culture dropped into a Unitarian Universalist worship service one morning to find out what we were all about. People were polite, but they were very quiet. They didn't express themselves during the service. One of the hymns had a real beat to it, and the visitor started swaying and celebrating the rhythm. And when the lady preacher announced that her topic would be in honor of the upcoming Valentine's Day holiday, the visitor voiced her approval, saying, "All right, tell it to us." And at that point, an usher rushed to her side and asked her what she was doing. "Why," she said, "I've got religion." And he put his finger to his lips and whispered, "Not in church." Don't go. I'm not that polite. You can shout out whatever you want, whenever you want. And I'll try to do the same, because our topic today is religion. But let us begin our worship with music from our pianist, Misha Beresnev. Misha? For centuries, insiders have been democratizing their religions. Incremental moments of institutional reform have led to a new era of theological enlightenment. From out of ancient times into the twilight of now, these reformers have made a sacred vow to never mischaracterize freedom as a zero-sum game. True freedom is not jealous. True freedom is not envious. True freedom is not spiteful. True freedom does not desire to restrict the rights of others. True freedom knows not a selfish thought, knows not how to threaten. To sense true freedom is to know that your win is my glory and that your suffering is inextricably tied to my own. For the sum of all that is holy shines far beyond the tools of our evolving democracy, from party jingles to picket signs. The sum of all that is holy is found in our collective desire to know freedom, not as a political slogan, but as a way of life. Please join me in singing our opening hymn this morning, Faith of the Larger Liberty. Our lead singer this morning is Dennis Webb. It's his first time with us, and we welcome him here.
Faith of the larger liberty, source of the light expanding, law of the church that is to be
you, Dennis. Are we a people of holding on or of letting go? Holding on to the rigid ideas or letting go and opening our minds and our hearts to something new? Holding on to certainty of how things should be or letting go and living with the uncertainty of new ways of being in the world? Holding on to what makes us comfortable or letting go so we may grow, which can be uncomfortable? Holding on to what makes us safe or letting go to make room to help others feel safe? Please join me in lighting our chalice and say the words with me as they appear on your screen. With this flame, this symbol. Just a minute, I've lost my words. You've got them on your screen and I don't have them. Sorry about that technical difficulty. We'll pick up where we left off. With this flame, this symbol of our religion, let it be a symbol of burning up the ties that hold us back from being our true selves and reaching our true potential. Let it be a symbol of lighting a new way for us into a better tomorrow. And let it be a symbol of letting go, because holding on too long and too tightly is never good for the soul. Since the beginning of the year, we've been celebrating Chalaka by exploring the principles that support our faith. Our Chalaka celebrant this morning is Julie Hevelone, co-chair of the Worship Arts Committee. Julie?
And happy Chalaka. We are celebrating this uniquely Unitarian Universalist holiday by honoring one of our principles each week. My name is Julie Hevelone. I am the co-chair of the Worship Arts Committee, and I have chosen Principle 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth within our congregations. I see this as a three-pronged principle. First is spiritual growth individually. Second is our willingness to encourage and nurture each other's spiritual journeys. And third is the spiritual development of our congregation. My individual journey began years ago when I would read the sermon title each week, and that would determine whether or not I came to church. As the years progressed, I began to attend church more frequently and regularly, regardless of the sermon topic. As you can imagine, I began to see a transformation in my own spiritual growth. I was being exposed and hearing ideas that I would not have otherwise listened to and that were challenging my tightly held beliefs. The second prong of this principle, encouraging each other's spiritual journeys, sounds like it should be easy, but I think it might be hard. I don't know where each of you are on your spiritual path. I don't know who is prayer adverse and who prays. I don't know what each of us think about God. I don't know what path brought you to Unitarian Universalism. These are conversations that I'd love to have in the coming year. The third part of this principle is the part that holds us accountable for the spiritual development of our congregation. Opportunities abound for us to be in fellowship with one another, which will lead to deepening relationships, which will help each of us encourage our own spiritual growth as well as each other's, and will encourage spiritual development within our congregation. We can worship together online, even though we are apart. We have opportunities for Zoom meetings where we can socialize, and there are abundant educational opportunities for us. This congregation is a safe place for us to discuss our spiritual beliefs and to work on our spiritual development. I do believe that we can accept one another and encourage our spiritual development within this congregation. How do you celebrate being a Unitarian Universalist? Happy Chalaka!
Thanks, Julie. Now, please let's say our covenant together. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. As I wrote in the newsletter, there are many Unitarian Universalists who don't like me to use words like religion or worship, prayer or holy. They are usually people who escaped from a different church in which they were raised and want to put all those old ideas behind them. They want to concentrate on words like truth and freedom. Those are great words, great ideas. Then there are people who are new to church and don't have any idea what a word like religion means, or have an idea that it belongs to a particular faith, but not ours. But I'm going to talk about what religion means today, and in the future as well, in other churches and in ours. And so my questions for you to consider this morning are these. What does religion mean to you? What does it stand for? What does it include, in your opinion? And what does it leave out? While you ponder, let us hear a story for all ages written by Erica Hewitt and told by our own Thomas Earthman.
Today's Time for All Ages is inspired by the Reverend Erica Hewitt, who runs the UUA's worship web. Now, our Time for All Ages is often a moment for make-believe, pretend, maybe a little what if. That's how we tell the stories, with the lesson in them. So today's lesson is about our Unitarian and Universalist ancestors, but in the beginning, I want you to think about something else for just a minute. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a baseball game. All right, pretty good. How many of you have a team that you follow, one you think of as your team? Okay, all right, hands down. How many of you play the game yourself? Yes, softball counts. Go ahead. Ooh, all right, pretty good turnout. Well, I have some big news. I have an announcement here. It's an advanced copy of a statement from the office of the governor coming out tomorrow, and it's about baseball. So I'm going to share it with you. A little sneak peek. All right. Hear ye, all citizens of Texas. Effective immediately, are hereby notified that baseball is now illegal within our borders. From today forward, it's absolutely forbidden to watch baseball, play baseball, or to go to a baseball game. You can't even stand in your backyard with a ball and bat. If you must, buy a frisbee or kick around a soccer ball. When interviewed, the governor said, "Don't ask why. We have our reasons. We mean it. No matter how old you are or which team you used to root for, you will now be in huge trouble and go to jail for a long time if you watch or play baseball in the state of Texas starting today." Okay. Well, baseball's going to be illegal. What are we going to do? Well, what will you do knowing that you could go to jail for playing baseball or even just watching it? I know some people are going to say, "I wouldn't care. I don't really like baseball." That's fair. Others are going to say, "Well, I'd play anyway and see if they meant it. I'd go to jail if I had to." You might say, "I'll go to Oklahoma and watch baseball where it's still legal." Some of you are real activists who'd say, "I'm going to protest in front of the state house," or "I'll try to reverse the law." Maybe we've got a few daredevils who'll say, "I'm going to keep playing or watching baseball in secret with people that I trust not to tell on me." All of those are possible ways to respond. Maybe this new law doesn't really affect you and you shrug it off. Maybe the threat of prison scares you enough that you stop or you sneak around. Maybe you try to leave Texas and go someplace where it's legal to play baseball when you want to hit a few balls or watch a team play. This all might sound really strange, but there are countries where doing simple, everyday things are forbidden. A lot of the time, the forbidden things have to do with speaking out or practicing religion. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow and found out it was against the law to be a Unitarian Universalist or to talk about Unitarian Universalist beliefs. That's the dilemma some of our religious ancestors actually faced. Nearly 500 years ago in Europe, people got tired of being told that there was only one way to practice a religion, and they began to read the Bible for themselves, and they thought about it and came up with whole new religious beliefs. And a few of them were our religious ancestors, part of a movement called the Radical Reformation. And they talked about a new religious belief that today we would call Unitarian, or sometimes they were referred to as non-Trinitarian. These brave people began to practice being Unitarian, even though it was forbidden. They could have gotten in a lot of trouble if they were ever caught. And some of them did. Some of them got caught. Some of them got in big trouble. Now, some of them said, I'll stop. That's not that important to me, and I'll just go along with what we're supposed to believe. Others said, well, I'll be a Unitarian in secret with people I trust, and in public, I'll pretend to go along with what I'm told. Some of them said, I'm out of here. And they left, and they went to places where it was less dangerous or even safe to be a Unitarian. A few of them said, nope, I'm going to be a Unitarian anyway. I'm going to talk about my beliefs, even if it gets me in trouble, because I can't deny my conscience or my faith. In order to be who we are today, in order to have the church we have today, we needed all of those early Unitarians. The ones like Michael Servetus, who died because he had the courage to stand for his faith and for what he believed in. Some who fled to other countries, like Faustus Succinus. And even the ones who practiced Unitarian beliefs in secret. Maybe even the people who said it's not that important, because they made a choice. You'll be happy to know that it is safe to play baseball in Texas. That was just a story I was telling you to help you understand the kind of courage and confidence it takes to stand up to an unfair law. I hope you're happy being a Unitarian Universalist and grateful for all of our ancestors who did stand up. Let's be thankful for the people throughout the past 500 years who made sure we could inherit our faith and take care of it for the next generation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Thomas. That was fun. You had me worried there for a minute. You know, I was shocked when I got to seminary and found out there isn't a single agreed upon definition for the term religion. You're told it comes from the Latin religare, meaning to tie or to bind, but to what and with what is not explained. And if you look it up in some dictionaries, it will say something like this: a strong belief in a supernatural power or powers that control human destiny, or an institution to express belief in a divine power, or a belief concerning the supernatural, sacred, or divine, and the practices and institutions associated with such beliefs. Or it might just say the opposite, like these definitions: a system of beliefs and practices by means of which a group of people struggle with the ultimate problem of human life. That system of activities and beliefs directed toward that which is perceived to be of sacred value and transforming power. Now, some definitions name a particular faith, like Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, or Islam, as being synonymous with religion, ignoring the 4,198 different faiths in the world. I don't remember whose count that is and how different is defined. I would have guessed 25, maybe 50, but when I typed the question into my search engine, that's one of the answers that came up. I understand why some people want to discard the word altogether if it doesn't relay exact information from the speaker to the listener when it's used. On the other hand, I think this multiplicity of definitions indicates just how important it is, or could be, to the human psyche or the human understanding of actions and interactions. I mean, take the concept of happiness. One definition won't suit everybody. Different things make different people happy. Happiness evokes different emotions and reactions in individuals and groups. But we don't talk about discarding the word or the idea it conveys altogether. It's not a hot-button issue like religion sometimes is. Wikipedia, one of my favorite online sources of opinion, in fact, though you have to sort out which is which for yourself, tackles the problem head-on. I copied 3 full pages of definitions in 10.5 typeface, that's very tiny print, when I was researching the topic. They had this section with the warning, the definition of religion is controversial and complicated. It's a different subject than religious studies, with scholars failing to agree on any one definition. However, there are 2 general definition systems, the sociological function definition and the phenomenological philosophical one. In other words, it's either defined by how a faith or religious system looks at the way we treat one another in a social situation, or it responds to the things we can't explain and lays down rules for what is acceptable behavior and what is not. And then there is one more twist. Some scholars claim it is a modern construct that wouldn't have been understood through much of history in many cultures outside the West and should not be applied historically. The reason being that what we study as religion in the past and in some cultures today is not separated by its adherents from everyday life. Morals, mores, actions, and expectations. It was simply living. Now, this is a real porcupine of concept, and I have to admit that while I use the word freely to describe what we do here, what I do as part of my calling, what we call ourselves when we are in conference with one another as Unitarian Universalists, I don't usually place myself in the center of the controversy or even bring it up unless it's a part of a reading I'm sharing or a comparison I'm making with other belief systems. Even those theologians I enjoy or agree with, like William James, give me a shiver sometimes when they try to squeeze their ideas into a simple single definition where half the words require definitions of their own before one can claim to understand them. If you want to know what else Wikipedia puts out on the buffet, I recommend you check it out for yourself, but I'm going to go in a different direction now. About 5 years ago, I came across a slim volume titled Religion for Atheists, a non-believer's guide to the uses of religion. It was written by Alain de Botton, published in 2012. Up until that time, I'd been content to answer the question about what I thought religion was to me, but more about that later. This dichotomy, this opposition of ideas, this apparent spiritual paradox intrigued me when I read de Botton's book. He took the approach of denying his own belief in any established religious system, and then, hands and brains free of religious baggage, he proceeded to explore not the definition of religion, but its historical uses. He wrote, "It is when we stop believing that religions have been handed down from above, or else that they are entirely daft, that matters become more interesting. We can then recognize that we invented religions to serve 2 central needs, which continue to this day, and which secular society has not been able to solve with any particular skill. First, the need to live together in communities in harmony, despite our deeply rooted selfish and violent impulses. And second, the need to cope with terrifying degrees of pain which arise from our vulnerability to professional failure, to troubled relationships, to the death of loved ones, and to our own decay and demise." Wow, I had to close my eyes and think about that. It's almost too easy, isn't it, to look at usefulness and not consider veracity. I'm thinking your brain might need a rest right now. Put the TV or the computer you're using to stream on pause for a minute, or just shut your eyes and think about it. Or think about what Julie said about truth and meaning during the Chalaka celebration this morning. Think about the questions I asked about your definition of religion. Or just listen to my generosity report for this morning, and then we'll pick this up in a few minutes. It's getting close to the time of our annual stewardship campaign. You're going to be asked to support this church for another year with your time, your talent, and your treasures. And I'm pleased to say that Dan Sexton, former board treasurer, has agreed to be our stewardship chair, but he cannot do this alone. So I'm asking you to consider volunteering to be part of this important support network for the church. Contact me at minister@firstjefferson.org, and I'll pass on your name to Dan. Or if you have his email address, go ahead and make his day by contacting him directly. And thank you very much. I have a couple of other items, too. There's a man by the name of John Clay who is a friend of this church. He's not a member. He doesn't belong. But he came here one time to use our facility, and he was so pleased with the way he was treated and the service that he got that he frequently just sends us money. Sometimes just drops it in the mail slot. But he always supports this church even though he attends another one. I think that's a kind of method of true religion, when somebody can use that kind of generosity and support one another. So I am recommending that you support John Clay and his wife Tasha, because she runs Nana's Kitchen here on the east side of Fort Worth. And if you want to support her restaurant, I've eaten there. She makes delicious food. I also want to remind you now that our Adult Religious Exploration Committee is beginning our Widening the Circle of Concern with first reading a lecture that Dr. King gave at our General Assembly, I think in 1966 or 67. And you have in your newsletter the link to read his speech. And then this coming Tuesday at 7 o'clock, we're going to join each one another on Zoom and discuss it. Be there, because I think it's going to be a very exciting discussion. Thank you so much. My reading this morning is titled A History of Church, Including Yours, and was written by Sean Neil Barron. He wrote, "One day your church was born. Maybe it was a gathering of saints called together for the common worship of a wrathful God, ceaselessly praying between bouts of decrying the evil of Christmas or dancing. Or maybe a few brave souls answered a notice in the newspaper, curiosity piqued by the announcement of a religion where free thinking and tolerance were going to be the bedrocks. No matter how it happened, your church was born, a gathering of people, humble, caring, anxious, and quirky all at the same time, who covenanted to be with one another on the journey of life, death, and everything in between. And so it began, a faithful few, beautifully imperfect, called to that central task, that human task of connecting, loving, and serving. It was just a baby, and yet it was thrust deep into the human condition, tasked to hold minds and souls, bodies and hearts along the roller derby of disease and birth, infighting and joy, and Christmas pageants. Sometimes all of those at the same time. They gathered to hear the world broken open, for insightful sermons, rejuvenating music, and a community whose fierce devotion to each other's well-being rivaled a mama bear's for her cubs. But it wasn't always like that, of course. There were the trying times, and I don't just mean Phyllis or Jack, those stubborn but lovable souls who inhabit the netherworld of committee meetings. No, I mean the really trying times, when the church almost split in half over the war or integration, or when the mill left town vacant, or when the minister crossed that line and the people couldn't speak about it for decades. But somehow you were still there, still in the town common, still the church that everyone recognizes, still the ones that shows up every time you were called on, still using the communion silver until you voted to sell it. New people came and they changed things, small things, big things, things that nobody noticed as it happened until suddenly it was hard to even recognize anything anymore. That was a hard moment, a tearful moment. And other things changed too. The proclamation about God, once heard loud from the pulpit, softened. Wrathful became loving. Distant became intimate. Mandatory became optional. After the war, the nursery and RE classrooms were overflowing. Each baby dedicated reminded the church of the incredible beauty of all of life and the gift of this community, all huddled around the baby and what it would bestow upon this child. The history of your church is more a story of the determination of love to break forth than it is about chalices, sermon discussions, or social justice committee meetings. The history of the church is the history of human enterprise, evolving in its sights and sounds, yet revolving always around its core. The history of your church is the gift of potential and momentum, of baggage and personality. The history of your church is the launch pad from which you spring into action or disarray. Each day, your church is reborn. Please join me now in singing our hymn, and it will be led again by Dennis.
Our faith is but a single gem upon a rosary of head, the thread of truth which runs through them supports a varied human needs. Confucian wisdom, Christian care, the Buddhist way of self-control, the Muslim's daily call to prayer are proven pathways to the goal. From many lips in every age, the truth eternal is proclaimed by Western saint and Eastern sage, and all the good however named. Beside the noblest of our race, our lives as yet cannot compare. May we at least their truth embrace, and in their sacred mission share.
Thank you, Dennis and Misha. I'm not familiar with that song, and I had never sung it before. Most Unitarian Universalists, when they're confronted with comparative theology or definitions of terms, they construe as belonging to another kind of faith statement, is to say, but that doesn't apply to us. We're different. We don't take things on faith unless we can prove them. We look at the scientific proof behind statements of belief. We don't accept anything that isn't proven by our own experience. And some of that is true. Some of it is posturing because we have to have a response when we are told we're doing religion, ethics, or even living incorrectly. I suspect some of us enjoy being called heretics for the pure obstinacy of it. I have to admit I sometimes do. But a lot of these objections keep us from exploring things that other people take for granted, or examining the history of our particular spiritual position. We often forget that neither the Unitarian Church nor the Universalist Church started out as it is today, and why and how the changes in values and beliefs occurred. We sort of discard the parts of history that make us uncomfortable or embarrass us because they no longer fit what I believe. But you know, if we can't embrace our histories, we can't imagine our futures. And that leaves us fragile and limits our authority and influence in the area of our lives we consider most important. I encourage you to take courage and face the past. Face any embarrassing or uncomfortable beliefs that you once held, if you no longer hold them. And face the fact that there are a lot of people who don't think as you do, and we share a very small planet with them. How did we get here? And where are we going? De Botton, after noting all the current bestsellers decrying the religious absurdities of believing in super beings we can neither see nor locate except in our minds, wrote this: "Secular society has been unfairly impoverished by the loss of an array of practices and themes which atheists typically find it impossible to live with because they seem too closely associated with," to quote Nietzsche's useful phrase, "the bad odors of religion." In giving up on so much, we have allowed religion to claim as its exclusive dominion areas of experience which should rightly belong to all of humankind, and which we should feel unembarrassed about reappropriating for the secular realm. He pointed out that all religions in the past have reappropriated parts of an old, discarded faith before turning them into new discoveries of spiritual acceptability, including Christianity, including Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam, to name just a few. But, he argues, religions merit our attention for their sheer conceptual ambition, for changing the world in ways that few secular institutions ever have been able to do. Religions have managed to combine theories about ethics and metaphysics with a practical involvement in education, in fashion, politics, travel, hostelry, initiation ceremonies, publishing, art, and architecture, a range of interests which puts to shame the scope of the achievements of even the greatest and most influential secular movements and individuals in history. For those interested in the spread of and impact of ideas, it is hard not to be mesmerized by examples of the most successful educational and intellectual movements the planet has ever witnessed through religion. Here's where this is going. I'm coming back to Mr. de Botton throughout the coming months. I'm going to take little pieces of what he says in this fascinating volume he wrote. He's one of us, and he doesn't go to church, but he does have the courage to look at his own predilections and philosophical assumptions with a bright light and a broad scope. I hope we can do a little of that ourselves. My third response will be based on some of my own theological difficulties that might help you keep from stubbing your own philosophical toes. And you might want to buy this little book for yourself, or you might just want to wait for my interpretation. I don't make any commission on the book, so if you do, but you might want to consider one review that calls it quirky and hilarious, two of my favorite attributes in a writer. This is the time in our service when we share a communion of names and milestones. I've not heard from anybody that they have any problems or any great celebrations this month, but I know these stories do live in our midst. And I know that you talk to one another and you know the stories that people are going through. And we help one another, we listen, we care. So let us just believe that for a moment we are in touch with all of this congregation that cannot come to church during the pandemic shutdown. And let us believe that we continue to support one another, to keep one another in our hearts and our minds. Let us just take a moment to close our eyes and share a silence. And then we will ask Misha to play some music as we consider how we will greet one another again one day. Misha. Thank you. Thank you, Misha. Change is difficult. It doesn't help to say it is inevitable. That doesn't make it any easier. When you are taught something as a child from those you look up to, parents, teachers, and loved ones, it is almost impossible to see any argument against it at the time. And so you embrace it, you believe it, cherish it even, pass it on, until there comes a time when you can't anymore. And even then, when experience tells you something different, when another point of view is introduced and found acceptable, it's often hard to let the old ones go. So when we do let it go, if it gets that far, we often fling it far away from where we stand, calling it burden, calling it error, calling it propaganda or cruel hoax. We throw it on the ground, and then we stomp on it. When I became an adult, my mother confessed that she was an atheist, but she had sent me and my siblings to Sunday school and church so we could choose to be something other than she was if we wanted to. But, I pointed out to her, she had failed to give us a choice because we heard only one side of the argument. And I was angry because she hadn't said we had a choice. I was angry because I felt indoctrinated. And I realize now that if she'd told me only of her atheism and I had followed her path, I would have been just as angry when I discovered religious ideas that appealed to me. Ideas like social justice, personal morality, beloved community. I would have felt indoctrinated by her unbelief, which didn't take these ideas into consideration. So if something similar happened to you, either way, you found out that there were ideas about in the world that you had been kept from, or told were wrong, or simply didn't have immediate access to. Part of being human is to discover that you don't know everything there is to know, and some of it might mean you have to change your mind, change your way of thinking, perhaps even your way of being. Of course, we always have the choice of resisting change, of hanging on to original messaging, of being comfortable with the familiar to the point of resisting the unfamiliar. I've tried it both ways, and we probably all have up to a point. And I've decided that the discomfort is worth it. The joy of exploration is worth the pain of changing your mind, changing your outlook, changing your place in the world of ideas and relationships, at least to me. And I've discovered the hard way that when we discard everything about a rejected idea or point of view, discard the language as well as the conviction, it doesn't make the transitions any easier. It simply destroys landmarks and pathways, leaving you to stumble around until you find new ones. But if you subscribe to the policy of rebuilding the language or some of the language, changing it to have a richer, more fuller meaning, you have a starting point from which to travel. So I'm going to say, here's where I started, and here's what I called it. I've gone beyond the place and discovered the name religion has many meanings, many attributes I don't want to leave behind. I'm going to continue exploring, continuing the search for truth and meaning, continue enlarging my insight and my ability to accept new ideas, or at least examine them in the light of both the past, the present, and the future. And I hope you'll join me, because over the next few months, I'm going to come back to this topic. Whether you're a believer, an agnostic, an atheist, or an undecided, I hope you'll join me on this adventure suggested by author Alain de Botton, which he called Religion for Atheists. Who knows? You might end up calling it enlightening. Our closing hymn this morning is number 1003 in the Teal hymnal.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where are we come from? Where are we going?
Thank you, Dennis. That sort of sums up what I've been talking about, doesn't it? Our chalice was lit this morning to light the way into freedom, discovering truth and meaning in our lives and in our relationships. I extinguish it now only because I know it lives in our hearts and our minds. One of my favorite readings that's in our hymn book is what I use for my benediction this morning. It's by Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. So may it be in all our lives.